because I always forget to hit that button, and then I'm 10 minutes into whatever I'm doing. Ugh, we lost 10 minutes of it. So welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. This is our first Accreditation 101 workshop. It's pretty much an orientation. So as you see in the slides, hopefully most of you have gotten, that's all of the information we're going to be working through today. I know as Healthy Families New York, we're accustomed to always doing some kind of orientation or some kind of introduction of each other. But given the fact that there are, as of now, 77 people here, we're not going to do that today. So I hope that's all right. You are going to get an opportunity to kind of work together in groups. We'll talk about that through the presentation. But again, I want to thank you. As I said, we'll be doing this about every month, and it will be about 2 hours, and we will be recording. So if you can't make it, don't worry about it. All of that information will go out, the recording and the PowerPoint slides. All right, so I'll share my screen. Let's see if I can. All right, do you all see a share?
Yes.
All right, perfect. I'm gonna start the slideshow, hopefully. There we go. Oops, let's start from the beginning. That would be helpful. And I'm going to move y'all here. All right, so welcome. My name is Claudia, and I'm a proud member of HFNY Central Administration, or CA. My goal for today is to have all of you leaving this workshop feeling supported through this accreditation process and knowing the expectations we have of you and what you can expect from us. So, has it really been 5 years? Yes, it has. Today's agenda will be to really answer some questions that some of you may have. So, what is CA? Who are you? What shared expertise exists within HFNY? What are the best practice standards and why do I need to memorize them? Well, just kidding, sort of. What is the accreditation process? How will I be rated and based on what? What can I expect from Healthy Families New York CA? What is expected of me? And what do I need to start doing right now? So hopefully we'll answer all of these questions. If you have any additional questions, please put them in the chat or just raise your hand, or maybe even unmute yourself because there's so many of us, I might not see the icon go up. However, I do have to say that we do have a lot of information to go through, so I will make sure we stay on track. But just know that we will generate a Q&A document for all of our accreditation workshops and make that document available to everyone. Also, this workshop and all other workshops will be recorded and shared. And as you already know, all slides will be shared ahead of time. All right, so I generated my email list based off of whoever registered for the workshops. So that's who will be getting it in addition to the HFNY PM listserv. If you have any additional people that you want either attending these sessions or that you want me to send information to, you could either send me their email or send them the registration for the March 15th accreditation workshop that will be going out likely next week, right? So, what is a multi-site system? A lot of you know a lot of the information we'll be covering in the first, I would say, probably half to 2/3 of this presentation. But again, an overview is always good to have. So according to HFA, multi-site systems consist of a central administrative entity providing support to HFA single sites. So all of you. The functions are to help around policy development, policy delivery, training, quality assurance, technical assistance, evaluation, administrative guidance, some research pieces. So one huge advantage of multi-site system is that there is an economy of the whole or an economy of effort. So we all learn from each other and we all collaborate. In essence, think about it as, this is oversimplified, but test prep all the time with some tweaks here and there. So as you work through your ASR process, your site visit process, looking at your PIs, your PTs, your quarterlies, these are all kind of mapping on to all of these best practice standards, which are essentially ends up being the accreditation process. The hope is that because you're continuously doing this, the self-study and the rest of the accreditation will require some tweaks here and there because we're adjusting to the new best practice standards, but overall, the hope is that nothing is too unfamiliar to you. All right. And as you all know, in our state, the multi-site system is called HFNY, and it's referred to as CA, or the Central Administration System. And there are lots of folks on with us today. I'm part of it. I see Caroline, Margaret's out there too, right? So this is what it looks like in New York. So you have the Office of Children and Family Services, and within that, you have the Bureau of Program and Community Development. That's where your PCMs live, and they provide project management, oversight, contract development, performance monitoring, quality assurance, technical assistance, and sometimes therapy, just to support you through some of the difficulties. And so then there's us. So this is where I'm at, which is the Bureau of Research Evaluation and Performance Analytics. And we help with evaluation design planning, data analysis, performance evaluation. We also answer some questions for some of you who have researchers approaching you and asking you to do some research on their site. Then there's Prevent Child Abuse New York. They provide a ton of training, also therapy, I would say, technical assistance, quality assurance. They're really the ones who get to the meat of healthy families. They're the ones who really teach us about the model and the goals of healthy families. And the Center for Human Services Research at Albany. And sometimes the personification of this group is Corinne Noble, and they help us with MIS design, maintenance, data collection, and analysis, performance measurement, report preparation, and TA. They're the ones who really help with that process of knowing where we stand. Where do our data stand at the program level and at the system level to see where we can target certain areas for improvement for that TA? Okay. So what shared experience actually exists within HFNY or expertise? Lots. This isn't our first rodeo. In addition to going through this process 4 times, the majority of CA members have been through implementation and peer reviewer training. And there are a number of you out there that have also gone through peer reviewer training. All right, so we will receive our multi-site accreditation. We have a ton of experts out there. Now, let's get a sense of what that expertise looks like. I'm going to launch a poll, and it's around your experiences with accreditation. Here are some of the poll questions, and I really want you to think about this in your experience as an individual, not as your program. So I want you to think about if you're in a program and you just started there and you've never gone through accreditation as an individual, then answer no. If you have gone through this whole process, then answer yes, and let us know how it's been for you. All right, so I'm going to launch the poll. Can you see the poll? All right, I'm going to give you all a couple of minutes to go through it.
Claudia, number 3 has to be answered. So even if we have not gone through accreditation, we're forced to answer something, just so you know.
Oh, thank you. That's not helpful.
So do you want us to just,
Everyone, yeah, just put in whatever. We'll figure something out
okay.
for that.
I just answered it and said what I think will be the hardest part.
All right, there you go. That's good. So the question now has turned into what was or do you think will be the hardest part? Thank you for that flexibility. All right, so I'm going to end the poll now. A good portion of you participated, over 80. So let's see what we have. I'm going to share results. So as you can see, if I make it bigger, can you see it? Did it eat up the whole screen? Or just look bigger? All right. So 60% of you have not, or 59% of you have not been through accreditation yet, all right? But a good 41% have, which is good. It's a good mix. 69 said that your site has gone through an HFA site visit, which makes sense because hopefully everyone here has or the majority of the people here are folks who are actually in the sites that will be going through accreditation. I know that we opened up a registration to newer programs, so welcome. Thank you for coming in and getting a general orientation of the process. And then we realized, thank you, Sarah, that question number 3 is kind of wonky, but what was the hardest, or what do you think will be the hardest? And it's looking like it is pretty much evenly split between the writing process, the analysis process, knowing what to include, and knowing how to organize all of the materials. Finding the information to include in the self-study seems to have the lowest responses. 73% of you have not gone through peer reviewer training, but there are 21 of you out there who have, which is great because we will be leaning on everyone who's gone through peer reviewer training to help through this process. And 3 of the folks out there have served as an HFA reviewer, and 47% have completed the HFA implementation training. Okay. So it's a good mix, a nice mix of folks. I know that I've asked a couple of folks out there to screenshot these results, so they will actually be plugged in the presentation and you will see it coming up here. All right, so once we are done, you'll see how it kind of spreads out. Like I said earlier, the majority of our programs will be participating in accreditation, and by 2029, the entire state will embark on this journey. So all of you just starting out, know by the next go around, you will have a lot of experts surrounding you. So what are the best practice standards? Many of you know how to answer this question. And for many of you, the following few slides are super redundant, but stick with me. Again, repetition is pretty beneficial. So HFA has developed a set of interrelated standards that guide practice. These standards are based on a set of critical elements that include these 14 elements. Make sure you're reviewing and referencing the most updated version of the standards as of now, that is version 8.3, which is kind of hard to see in this slide, but it is 8.3 and it was released in December of 2022. The standards serve as the site's guide and the system's guide to model implementation and are used to evaluate the site's status toward achieving model fidelity. As we also know, there is a certain structure to the BPS. Think of it as an outline. And again, there are a series of interrelated standards that are broadly organized by first order standards. So these are all BPS 1 through 12, GA, and national office requirements are considered first order. Right? You will be rated on a combination of second and mostly third order standards. So the blue and the teal, right? This is the second order standard are where major components of model fidelity can be found. They provide more context to guide implementation. And some are standalone and have no third order, like 9.2, 9.4, 10.1, 10.5, and GA6. Third order standard, this is where the meat of scoring, the meat of the information for your self-study really is. So it's the system and practice building blocks. This is where you really kind of can talk about your practice, right? So here's an example. Maybe, there you go. The first order standard, standard 1, BPS 1. And here's their intent. So that's usually what you find in your BPS as the first page that follows the title page for BPS 1, BPS 2, BPS 3. All right. And then there's the second order standard. As you can see in the pink numbering, it's 1-1. So this 1 indicates that it's a second order. And then your third order then follows the same naming criteria, and it's 1-1, point A, capital A. All right, so we'll be using BPS 1 kind of as an example throughout our time together today. Standards are also broken up into types of standards. So we know that there are safety standards. So there are 6 safety standards, and that these must be met, as you see in the bold here. We have to meet these in order to be accredited. And here they are. We're not going to go through them. Again, you have the slides. We are going to be going in depth together as we work over the next few months. So we're not going to get into the nitty-gritty of the standards right now. There are also 16 essential standards, and if any of these 16 are not met, an improvement plan will have to be submitted and approved by HFA in order to receive accreditation. Okay. Then we have the national office standards. There are 4 national office standards that must be met in order to even begin the accreditation process. So paying your fees, utilizing trademark HFA name and logo, all of these 4. Following every standard is an intent. So this is why. This is why the best practice standard is part of practice. This is why it's important. Okay, for the first order standards, it sets its foundation or the context for the element. Like, what's the point? The so what? For the second and third order, it provides further clarification about the purpose of the standard. Right? Then some, usually, you'll see these in the third order standards. You have the tips, so the hows, let's call them that. They're included to aid in implementation of standards. They provide some good ideas on documentation and implementation of the standard. However, please note, this is really important, that whatever is in the tips is not required. So to break it down, you have the expectation, the standard, the rationale, the intent, and the way to demonstrate adherence, or the how, which are the tips, right? And this is what it actually looks like in a very small, blurry version in the best practice standards. The first order, Here it goes. Again, this is BPS 1. Oops. Sorry. And then here you have a second order 1-4 and the third order, the Y. And here you also have an intent. So the more Y. So this really gets into details of practice rather than this being more kind of like research-oriented intent. And the tips are always seen within the best practice standards in these blue boxes. All right. And some of the materials that we will give to you as tools to use during this process, there will be some tip information for all of you who want to kind of push yourself further. I think what's really beneficial about some of these tips is that oftentimes they have questions embedded within them that really help you develop your narrative. Right? So we'll make a point in our workshops to kind of point those out. And you'll see that tips are generally associated with standards that actually receive a rating through the self-study and site visit process. So I've been talking about accreditation and this and that, and so what is it? Well, the HFA accreditation process originally evolved during a time when the HFA network was experiencing a lot and quick growth. During this expansion, HFA affiliate sites expressed a desire to truly mean something. All right, so what does it actually mean when we call ourselves a healthy family site? That's what programs wanted. The accreditation process was initially developed out of this desire and need. Today, HFA accreditation ensures sites are providing high quality home visiting services in fidelity with the HFA model. The HFA best practice standards establish the expectation for the policies and practices of HFA sites around the world. These standards have been constructed through research and consensus from the field and are updated every 4 years. All right. So we go through accreditation every 5 years because we are a multi-site system. And this is the accreditation, it's process. So we implement a program and then we work ourselves through this process. It's divided into 3 steps. Each of these steps allows the site to modify or tailor its current policies, procedures, or practices, while the accreditation process is required every 5 years for multi-site systems. Sites are encouraged to embrace a philosophy of continuous quality improvement, CQI. We just had that workshop last week, by making the standards a part of everyday practices and ongoing quality assurance, right? For example, all of the work that you do for OCFS, your ASR, your quarterlies, your site visits. In addition to that, a more kind of regular check-in is the discussions you have during team meetings, the discussions that you as program managers may have with your own supervisors, any kind of information that you may review in your progress with your advisory boards. Right? So the focus of these workshops are really going to lay in this self-study. So this is really the bulk of what we'll be doing since these self-studies are due by January 2024. After that, once the 35% of sites get picked by HFA for the site visits, which is the third piece in this infographic, then we will create a whole system of support with those, that 35% of programs, which, if my math is correct, is about 15 programs, okay? So the initial step in the accreditation process is the development of the site's self-study. The self-study is the site's first opportunity to demonstrate implementation of the standards and serves as both a process and ultimately a prepared document compiled by the site to reflect its policies, procedures, and practices. The first page of each site self-study is a completed face sheet, which is required to serve as a cover page of the self-study. Site staff engage in a process of internal review as they pull together the information necessary to illustrate implementation of the standards. This self-study process is one of continuous quality improvement whereby growth and positive change is achieved through an intense examination of each site's policies, procedures, and practices. The process also acknowledges and reinforces the standards that a site is already implementing to fidelity. Okay. So again, this will be the self-study piece will be our focus over the next few months. So how will you be rated and be rated? Sorry, let me really separate that. How will you be rated or scored and based on what? So for those of you who are pretty familiar with the BPS, you see these rating indicators all over the place, especially following many third order standards. And you have a score of 3, which says the program exceeds the standards. 2, which is really our aim. We're meeting the standard, awesome. This is what we're going for. We're going for those 2s. And 1, program is not adhering to the standard. All right. Also NA. We'll talk about that in a bit. In order to be accredited, the program has to have 85% of all standards at a 2 or 3 rating. Coupled with each standard are rating indicators used to determine the site's current degree of implementation. And these rating indicators are used to determine if the site is exceeding or meeting or not yet meeting the expectation. Some standards also have this NA in case a program has been in operation for too brief a time period to determine whether this particular standard is met. All right, so you'll know once you go through the standard whether you would be receiving an NA or not, given the description of the standard. Right, so here is an example of what that would look like in the BPS. You see it for 11A. This is a third order standard with 3 rating options. Right, so again, this 3 is exceeding the standard. And usually the reason for the change will be bolded. So for 3, all of this will have to be captured within the last 2 years. Right? So you're having these discussions with your community advisory board every 2 years, or at least the last 2 years. It happened the last 2 years before the peer reviewer is looking at your documentation for your self-study. For 2, it would have had to have occurred within the last 4 years. And 1 is, it's not happening. Or it happened more than 4 years ago. Right, so here's an example. And then here's an example of a third order standard with a 2 rating option. So there, it says clearly that there is no 3 rating for 11B. Right, and what you have to do to meet these standards is show that the site is identifying organizations within the community where families can be referred from and agreements, either formal or informal, are in place. I have to double check with Allison, but my understanding is that for all of you who are going through accreditation, who are also in the process, and maybe Kristen, you can answer this question, and are also going through the process of starting up the child welfare protocol, my understanding is that for your self-study, the focus is really on the HFNY traditional rather than also speaking to your child welfare process. But I will double check that for you.
I'm not sure about that.
Okay.
Yeah, we have to follow up with HFA about that just to make sure. we will have the capability to incorporate any analyses or reports that need to be run separately for that child welfare population, hopefully by the time any of those reports would be required. But we'll double check on that.
Yeah. Thank you. All right. So what do I need to have? What are they looking for? They're looking for policies. These peer reviewers will be looking through your policies, your analysis, any kind of plans, your equity and CQI plan, narratives that you will draft, MIS reports or data, and a ton of other documents like resumes, job descriptions, job postings. All right. So these are just some examples. Through our workshops, we'll be looking at various examples. Okay. And just know that within your BPS, you also have a number of resources. So the BPS details the documents you will need in the table of documentation. These tables assist sites in preparing for accreditation, indicating the policies and other documentation needed to demonstrate adherence to each standard. And they're found following every critical element. Okay. So at the back of BPS 1, the back of BPS 2, 3, etc., you will see these tables of documentation. The BPS also provides, that big book, also provides summary and guidance for data collection timeframes. And this is found according to BPS 8.3, found between pages 26 and 35 of that version, 8.3 that was released December 2022. These are also covered in your HFNY required documentation via your ASR, your site visit, your quarterlies, and also covered through the performance indicators and performance targets. Okay. Also note, thankfully, CHSR has done this for us, that many MIS reports can be run to review your own monthly progress. So this is something that you as a program manager, as a supervisor, could run a number of these programs on a number of these reports on a monthly basis to see how your program is doing, rather than focusing on a quarterly basis, for example. So here is the bulk of what many of you are probably coming here for. What can I expect from HFNY's central administration? Right. What you can expect is that we will provide you with the following: a monthly Accreditation 101 workshop, monthly accreditation office hours, an HFNY accreditation guidance tool, narrative boilerplate language for some standards, analysis assistance, and written feedback on your self-study. So here's our timeline. I know this was shared via regionals, and thank you very much to the folks at CHSR for compiling this timeline for us. January is done, all right? So we're in February. This is our first session. So you'll see that all the Accreditation 101 sessions run along that bottom line. These have all been scheduled. They will all occur 10 to noon on the dates noted. Moving forward, we'll see what happens. We'll see if we have more workshops, but I think for the time being, it's really helping you through the self-study process. And as a reminder, once the 15 sites are picked for the site visits, then we'll generate a whole new timeline for support to prep you for that site visit. You can see what we'll be covering every month. So March 15th, we'll be going through what you will need for your self-study for best practice standards 1, 2, and 3. All right. So you will have a to-do list today once we're done, but whatever you see here listed as kind of coming due, like reviewing finalized policies, all of that stuff, is really thinking about whatever you have already started, you can continue doing that process. But the bulk that pertains to the best practice standards that will be discussed on that accreditation one-on-one workshop or one-on-one session. So for March, we don't expect you to start anything on BPS 1, 2, and 3 until after we've discussed it in the workshop. Okay? So if you want to work ahead, you're more than welcome to. But again, the point is to try to create a supportive environment where folks maybe feel like, okay, this process is going to be a little bit less stressful than I thought it would be. Right? So in April, we'll cover another 3 standards. Again, it will only be the information that you will need for your self-study. And then in May, we're going to do a bit of a deeper dive into the analysis pieces for 1, 2, 3, 6, 10, 11, and potentially others that would follow. All right, because sometimes the analysis is what could get a little bit tricky for folks. So this is our timeline. What can you expect from these workshops? Every month we will focus on a set of standards, as I've already said. So March will be standards 1, 2, and 3. April will be 6, 10, and 11. We will walk through the HFNY accreditation guidance tool in detail, which I will show you in a couple of minutes. We will review examples. All right, examples of narratives, examples of reports, examples of maybe a little paragraph to interpret what that report says. All workshops will be recorded so we can revisit the content when needed. So again, if you can't make it on a particular date, don't worry, don't stress about it. It will be recorded. Everything will be shared. So HFA peer reviewers start with pretty limited knowledge about your program, sometimes even about the system. Therefore, we've incorporated a peer reviewer buddy cohort system. The purpose of assigning you to a new program contract manager or a new PCM is so fresh eyes can assure that you are covering all necessary points in your narratives and policies. In short, any and all documents that you'll submit in the self-study will be reviewed by these quote unquote fresh eyes, this new PCM. Our understanding is that many of you have been working with your PCM for a while, so you know the ins and outs. You know a lot of unspoken information about each other, a lot of history about each other that maybe you won't think to ask because, again, that knowledge is already in you. It's already in your brain. So the opportunity to have a newer PCM and a cohort of colleagues is to really have you talking about and describing and explaining processes that exist within your program in a detailed way that a new peer reviewer, an HFA peer reviewer, again, who has no background in your program, will really benefit from, okay? Smaller groups will also allow you to delve a bit deeper into questions you may have as you compose your own self-study. They'll allow you all an opportunity to share feedback and strategies that have worked for you. And if applicable and willing, will also allow an opportunity to get feedback on your written materials. Some TA around analysis and report interpretation will be provided by BREPA and CHSR. So in short, accreditation office hours are an opportunity for tailored support. And they were broken up regionally because, again, you all have so much knowledge already with your regions, you all know each other through the regional meetings. So there will be a possible sharing of resources. That's why cohorts were assigned by region. And these are the PCMs assigned to your region. So if you're an Albany regional person, you'll meet with either Rosanna or Tom. If you're a Mid-Hudson program, you'll meet with Anne Marie. If you're a New York City program, you'll meet with Karen, Carly, or Lorraine. If you're in Syracuse, your PCM is Jennifer. And if you're out in the Western region, it'll be Adriana or Matt. All right. This one's going to be a little tougher to see, and I'm going to hold it up for a while. But here you'll see where your program, who your program belongs to. Here's a list of programs by PCM. Right. I tried my best to do it in alphabetical order. And yes, I was going through the song as I was doing it. But I'm assuming for many of you, you've probably already heard from your PCM, from this office hours PCM. Right, so these are the programs you'll be with. Now, what to expect from the HFNY accreditation guidance tool? I know it's pretty impossible for you to see this because it is tiny, but this is an Excel spreadsheet. It's a guidance tool we created with the hope that it has all the information that you may need that will be helpful as you go through not only your self-study, but also maybe preparation for your site visit, okay? This will be completed and sent to you prior to our next meeting on the 15th of March. And at any point in time, if I make any additional changes, I will kind of follow the lead of HFA and send you HFNY Accreditation Guidance Tool 1, and then 1.2 if it changes, 1.3, and so on. As you can see below, this guidance tool has 14 workbooks. So these are the tabs underneath. You see guide, BPS 1, 2, 3, etc. Okay. The guide will detail the information we will review in the next slide. And each workbook is for one of the best practice standards. We will use this guide at all upcoming accreditation 101 sessions, particularly focusing on column D where it says self-study. Anytime you see self-study, that's what we'll be talking about in our 101 session for that standard. Okay, and these are each of the columns in that accreditation tool. The first column is the BPS standard number. So just to guide you, we'll be talking about 1.1-1, 1-1A, that kind of thing, right? So every column has information in it, and then every row will kind of pertain to the particular first, second, and third order of that standard. Tell you the type of standard that it is, whether it's a first order, a second, or third order standard, whether it's safety or essential. Again, all the safety have to be met in order to get accreditation, and all this essential should eventually be met or have an approved performance plan, improvement plan. The rating basis that will be used, whether HFA is using a self-study to rate it, the file review to rate it, or an interview, or a combination of three things. The rating documentation that you will need, whether it's a policy, a narrative, report, analysis, or a plan. Okay, so that all will be indicated. Whether it's a recent practice standard. So will you be allowed to, at your site visit, then look at most recent practice, which is information closer to your site visit. You'll also have the title of the MIS report that goes with that information. You'll have a description of the rating indicator. So generally speaking, it will be what you're going to be rated on, and then a break. You'll see kind of in parens sometimes, or in a different kind of paragraph. This is what a 2 rating will get you. This is what you need to provide for a 2 rating. This is what you need to provide for a 3 rating. All right. But again, remember, our focus is on 2s. I've also decided to include the tips as found in the BPS. Again, this may be helpful for all of you who want to elevate your practice. Awesome. But for the most part, I found it helpful because there are a lot of guiding questions that can help you really develop those narratives. Right. And then from the tables of documentation followed after every best practice standard, there are some narrative details. Right. So it's different from a tip because it's not really about developing the narrative. Narrative details, it's like what should be included, what do you have to have in there in order to get a good rating. And then we'll also include HFNY CA tracking. So I know I've written about this. Where is it tracked? Is it the ASR? Is it something that I provide during the site visit? Is it found in the performance indicators, targets, or is it in the quarterlies? Okay, so all of this information is going to be in this guidance tool by best practice standard. All right, so something a little different than I believe in the past is CA will actually develop some boilerplate language for the narratives needed for certain standards, not all standards. This will help us standardize the language that is expected of all HFNY programs within their narratives and hopefully take some of the writing load off of all of you, right? So then the question will be, is it too matchy-matchy? And no, it won't be too matchy-matchy. We will not have the requirement essentially will be that we're kind of going to present you with language that got us to this point. So for example, eligibility criteria is kind of standard across the state, but there are pieces that you make your own based on your program needs, right? So here is an example. And you'll see a color split. So why the color split? Well, the gray is what we will provide, and the blue is where you as a single site will customize your narrative, right? So I kind of talked about this already, but an example is as a statewide system, we have specific reasons for criteria we have chosen, but you may expand on those criteria based on your community's needs. So example is recent data from your community may indicate an uptick in refugee families. And this may be kind of something you've been seeing for a few years now. If you're nearing capacity and have found that very few refugee families have been recruited, then that may become a specific individual's criterion for your specific site for a targeted amount of time. So more specifically, this information should be covered in 1.1c discussion on strategies as you move it forward, but as it becomes an adopted process, it is up to you to also discuss how your site links your specific eligibility criteria with data reviewed at least every 4 years. All right. So as I mentioned, here's the full scope of our eligibility requirements and service delivery. We'll develop that standard boilerplate language for you. It is then up to you to add to this to better represent your day-to-day practice. So the thought is that the narrative boilerplate language will help lay the framework, the foundation for your narrative, but it's up to you to customize, personalize, and really make it your own. Okay, so think about conversations you've had at team meetings, at regionals, with your advisory board members. How have you thought about expanding or targeting your scope based on your community needs? Right, I'm going to double check the chat. Oh, yes, Trina, boilerplate meaning a standard language, and let's say Erin said it best, general language that everyone can use. So we'll start it off and then we'll give you some tips. Like now you can talk about, what's specific to your community. So, as HFNY as a system has adopted eligibility to include these pieces. And at Otsego, we have added to this by looking at the needs of, this particular community or et cetera, or we have noticed differing patterns or whatever it could be. Right? I hope that makes sense. All right. Now, what other support can we expect? Well, you can also expect we'll provide one place where you can share your documentation for review and ultimately submission to HFA. So I'm working with IT at OCFS to get everyone access to a SharePoint that we can use for this accreditation process. And why is it helpful? Well, through SharePoint, your PCMs and other CA partners will be able to provide feedback to you, like on-the-spot feedback. You will also be able to have one place where you can keep track of communication between you and your accreditation buddies. So instead of, I'm kind of embarrassed to admit this right now, but my inbox is bananas. I have tons of emails. And sometimes I forget to file those emails into the little filing organizational system that I thought I would follow. So it's constantly kind of looking through my search to see where is that email that Kristen sent me with that attachment. So the hope is that with SharePoint, you can see what has been going on between you and your buddies and your PCM. Because it'll all kind of collapse into these organizational folders, right? And here's, I kind of said that already. So document management, knowledge management, project management. We don't need to build internal websites, manage news blogs and everything, right? So for those of you who've gone through accreditation, this means no more mail thumb drives. Yay! I know that was a big pain in the butt for many of our programs who went through the last accreditation cycle. Within these, we will also set up an organizational structure, kind of the structure that a lot of us learned when we went through peer reviewer training, a lot of the structure that's kind of required or requested by HFA. So a folder for each of the standards. All right, so you'll have your own program folder, and within your own program folder, you'll have a folder with each of the standards. What we ask is that you follow saving parameters and keep it clean, all right? So as soon as all this is set up, saving parameters will be provided, and we ask that you all follow these. It'll likely consist of the standard number, the table of documentation title, and the type of document, right? So you'll see here 3-1.A policy, that kind of thing. Now you're probably asking yourself, what is expected of me? And here on the bottom it says, instead of a weighted blanket, she sleeps under the suffocating weight of her responsibilities. We acknowledge that the load is heavy for all of you. CAs tried their very best to get an extension from HFA. Unfortunately, this was denied. So we are trying to adapt, and in attempting to do so, we're aiming to create a system of support that hopefully you will all find beneficial. So what exactly is it that you need to do? Well, take a breath and take it step by step. Put all 101s on your calendar or schedule time to review the recordings. All right, so make sure sometime soon all of those dates are on your calendars, or again, take an hour to 2 hours to review the recording. Stay in touch with your cohort and peer reviewer, your new PCM. Right. So if they're sending you doodle polls, make sure you answer them. If they're sending you emails, make sure you're answering those emails. Just close that communication loop. Check SharePoint regularly. Once it's up and running, it's not up and running yet. Once it's up and running, you will hear from me. Review the best practice standards and tools prior to your 101s. All right. So we don't expect you to have things done for your self-study prior to the 101, but we do expect you to know what the best practice standard is that we'll be talking about. And by know, we mean like the meat of the standard. Attend your 101s, show up or watch the recording. Make sure you're doing this. And definitely attend your office hours, because that's where you're going to get your individualized support from your PCM and your peers. And that's where you'll also be offering a lot of your own expertise. Complete assigned monthly tasks by due date. Regularly integrate new knowledge and feedback into your self-study. So once the SharePoint gets up and running, once we start kind of reviewing your pieces of your self-study, go in there and double check. Okay, has anything happened? Has anything changed? Have any comments been made? Have any questions been asked? We know that there is a final self-study due to us sometime in September, if I remember correctly, and you'll get full feedback then. But we will kind of be going in and checking from time to time just to not make that load too much for September. Complete your self-study and keep your files clean and updated. Ask as many questions as you need. And ask for help whenever you need it. All right. So Mark Twain said, the secret of getting ahead is getting started. The secret of getting started is breaking your complex, overwhelming tasks into small, manageable tasks and starting on the first one. We're hoping that our support throughout this process helps you break down the big tasks of accreditation into small, manageable tasks, right? Climbing this ladder will probably get you winded by, I don't know, this time or this time, but taking small steps at a time will get you there eventually. And you won't give up. So what do you need to start doing now? Well, by our next session, we hope that you've reviewed standards 1, 2, and 3. Have anyone who will be helping you with accreditation watch this recording if they're not here today. Reach out to your accreditation PCM if they have not reached out to you yet. And if they have reached out to you yet, please make sure you respond to any of their requests, whether it's a doodle poll or if they've emailed you or if their phone call or if they've called you. Okay. And thankfully, a lot of our policies have been updated to match the new best practice standards. So make sure you review your current finalized HFNY policies with a specific focus for the March 15th time to BPS 1, 2, and 3. And make any necessary changes to site procedures once you've kind of, you've looked through the standard. All right, so that is what I have today. And I'm going to end sharing to see if there are questions and see if I can answer any questions in the chats. All right, let's see. Damalia, what time frame is considered most recent practice? My understanding is that it really depends on the standard, but a general rule is 3 to 6 months from their visit.
Hey Claudia, it's
Hi.
Melanie. So it's usually like typically it's they HFA from our experience in doing site visits is 3 months is what they usually consider most recent practice.
Thank you for that.
Sure.
And yes, I will add Tioga to the Shenango site under Matt. When will sites know if they are chosen? Not until after HFA comes. So they'll be here in February. So after that visit, not sure when.
And I think Allison shared they usually let us know the last day that they're here for their on-site visit with us.
Mhm.
Is when they let us know.
So any questions from anyone out there? Are you able to unmute yourself? Yes. Well, Melanie did. So yes, you all are.
Claudia, this is Carol.
Hi, Carol.
First of all, thank you guys for all the support through this. Really appreciate that. And
Welcome.
I do have a question. So it's great that we're practice standards like in chunks, you know, and like each month. But I'm trying to kind of visualize. So if we do 1, 2, and 3, and I can't find the schedule, but say that's due in March or April. But then we have to submit the self-study in September. Will we like have to rerun the reports that are required for the self-study in September and then rerun them like again before the accreditors like come to OCFS in like February? Like I'm trying to like visualize like running of the reports and the time frame, and if we have to like rerun them at a different
Yeah, the
time.
specific time frame that you will be using is yet to be determined. So that we'll have an answer for you by March 15th. The goal is to get as much of the self-study done ahead of time. So the policies, are they set and polished? And the stuff that is pretty static, you know, is what we really are going to focus on a month-to-month basis with some walkthroughs of reports and how to interpret those reports, because the reports aren't static. So some of the narrative pieces that again are pretty static, but some of the interpretation of the data and the analysis is definitely not static. It's more of practicing it and then incorporating your most updated information by the time that self-study is due for review to CA in September. Does that make sense, Carol?
Yeah, that makes sense. And
Go ahead.
I think once we get started, it'll probably make
Yeah, I will break it down for every best practice standard. I will break down what you should be really working on and what, okay, maybe tinker around with this report and see what your numbers look like. Are your numbers looking like a 1? Are they looking like a 2? Or are they looking like a 3 for this? Does that make sense? All right. So every time you'll have like I guess a bit of a guidance slide or two that'll say for best practice standard 1, this is what you can now put into your SharePoint, because that's pretty much done. And a lot of them, I would say probably a quarter of the self-study are policies. So the understanding is policies stay pretty static, right? Maybe there's some tweaks here and there with your procedures, but you know, you'll start populating that SharePoint with policies, and then you could start populating that SharePoint with some of the language that is really information that doesn't change. So the composition of your advisory board, how you often you meet, that kind of information.
Claudia?
Yes.
Hi, it's Anne-Marie.
Hi.
How are you?
Good, and you?
I apologize that my camera's off. I'm having camera issues today.
All good.
I'm a Healthy Families dinosaur, as you know, so I've been there since the beginning. So I went to I've been through the very first accreditation until now. And I don't have a question. I just wanted to make some statements that, I really appreciate what I just want to piggyback on what Carol said on what OCFS has been doing for us. And it seems like every time we go through this, you guys try to break it down and make it easier and easier. And I really like this format. So I want to thank you for that. And I just want to reassure the newer sites that, there's a lot of guidance that comes along with this. So, I just want to reassure everybody it's gonna be fine. And, even though I hate accreditation, but we're gonna get through this. It is a lot of work, but breaking it down this way and the way you guys are doing this guidance, I think is awesome. So I just wanted to thank you guys.
And for Anne-Marie, let's see, Erica said, yes, Anne-Marie, you are not a dinosaur, you're a trailblazer. And for all the other trailblazers out there, please feel free to unmute yourself and share your experiences, because many of you have gone through this process numerous times. So we have a lot to learn from all of you. And thank you, Anne-Marie. The hope is to create a system of support that we can carry over to every accreditation process. So we really appreciate that.
Claudia, I just wanted to say one thing, being a dinosaur as well, but what I'm noticing here in terms of who's at the table, and having gone through a site visit back in the day, is I'm not just seeing program managers, I'm seeing supervisors as well. And one of the things that was huge was delegating and recognizing that as a program manager, you have other staff who can help you do these things. So just remembering that idea of sharing this amongst all of your staff, in some way, shape, or form, it really makes a huge difference. So it's nice to see that there are other people at the table here, because that delegation piece it can be incredibly helpful, and helpful for your entire staff to have more buy-in to the process and what the best practice standards do. So.
And I know it's awful that we don't know what sites are going to get picked for site visits, but like Caroline said, if you can get as many of your staff to be part of the creation of the self-study, then they're really becoming familiar with like the kind of language that HFA is looking for when they engage in those interviews during their site visits. So again, out of all of you out there, only 15 programs are going to get picked. But I think if you spread the effort across, it will be an easier process. So any questions around those buddy cohorts? And I'm going to include this in the slides when I send you the updated version. I forgot to. But a lot of what we're doing now was something that we learned from Healthy Families in Massachusetts. So they have this kind of accreditation support system within their sites, within their system. So a big thank you to them for kind of walking us through some of this infrastructure process. And one of the biggest pieces was this kind of cohort buddy system. So they called it a buddy system. I kind of took it. I hope it's not something that everyone's like cringing and like, oh, buddy. But that's the hope, that you all get support from each other. Right. And communication is super key with this. Close the communication loops. I know that The bulk of the communication right now is on the lap of your PCM, your new PCM. So please make sure if they're reaching out to you to answer them, please. Joe, are the buddy cohorts office hours open to others in our site or just the manager? This is me, Claudia, speaking to it. I think it's really a conversation that you all end up having with your buddies to see. But if you are asking other folks to help you through your site, your self-study writing process, I would think that it would make sense for them to attend, especially if they're focusing on a particular standard that month, and they're in charge of that. I would say, you know, the more folks, the better, but I think that's really left at the discretion of your group to decide who will be there. I think I answered the questions in the chat, or I think folks answered the questions for me too. Anyone else?
I have a question.
Yes.
Not meaning to be like a Debbie Downer, but from what I understand, if when the auditors, peer reviewers, sorry, come to your site, if you know, there's a standard that you say get a 3 in, you have to fix it.
A 1?
A 1, sorry,
Mhm.
3. Oh yes, I'm sorry. Yes, a 1. Yes. So I don't know if, you know, I'm being positive, but you know, sometimes things happen. So can anyone who has gone through this, like, kind of speak to what that experience was like? Like, you know, you've tried your best, but you still end up with a 1. Like, what was that experience getting it to a 2 or a 3?
Thank you, Damalia. Yes, would anyone like to speak to their experience of responding to those?
I will, because I've gotten plenty of ones in the past. And everybody does. So for one thing, you know, it's good to, it's hard not to take it personally or be upset about it, but you have to look at it as a learning process for one thing. So don't, you know, beat yourself up if you get a 1 on something. They give you plenty of time to make that improvement. Sometimes it's just the way you verbalized a policy or something, but I think because of what we've been going through and fine tooth combing our policies, they should be pretty polished. So I don't think we'll have too much trouble with that. Sometimes I'm trying to think, I know there, I think the last time, one of the things we had a 1 on was maybe it was family goal plans. I can't remember. It was something like that where some staff, they just caught some staff who hadn't documented correctly. So basically what we had to do then was, you know, show that we had some meetings with staff, that we did some training with staff, that we had, you know, made sure everybody understood the policy, understood how to document. And then I think we showed evidence of family goal plans again, and then we passed. So it really is just that, making corrections, whatever that is. And you get, I think it's 6 to 8 months or something like that. And I can't remember now exactly. I think it was about 6 months we had to respond. So we had plenty of time to make the corrections and then show that we were implementing. So that's really what you have to do, is just make sure you're showing that you're implementing that correction, and then they pass you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Anne Marie. Thank you, Damalia, for your question.
I have to say that OCFS was very supportive of the programs, you know, through that process, and that it made a huge difference, you know.
Thanks, Roxanne.
I agree with Roxanne. My name is Soraya. It was very intense, but at the end of the day, you were able to find out whether your program was running correctly or not. And the staff will know, does the staff know their policy well? so that they're able to run do their work without having to ask so many questions. So I would advise, start from now, every policy that you do, work with them, teach them, test them, see if they know the new policy, because that will help you a lot, because they ask a lot of questions to staff about policies. So make that, and then for the program supervisors, those supervision notes must be intact, because they really look at those notes. And it was stressful, but at the end of the day, when they sit with you and they go over every single policy and every single standard, is like stressful, but at the end it's like, oh wow, I did it. Like, I'm good. My program is good right now. So it's rewarding.
And just as a reminder, it's a lot of the stress sometimes really seems to be around the site visit. So our idea, our hope for the support that we'll provide once we know who those 15 programs are, what those 15 programs are, is to run a similar process, kind of like a monthly meeting, some office hours. And then the hope is also to do some possibility of role playing. So how could the interview look like? What kind of questions could be asked? How can I get my staff prepared to answer some of these questions? Because the tough part is, and I don't want to get into the soapbox right now, but especially if the reviewers don't have a language background that matches our program and our program staff, it's hard to convey the knowledge of what you do on a day-to-day basis in a way that kind of matches the goals and the expectations of the best practice standards. So it's not really about getting them to talk about things they don't do. It's just getting them to talk about the things that they do in a way that kind of perks up HFA's ears to say, okay, yeah, they're meeting these things. Okay, so that's the hope of what we'll be doing workshop-wise once the 15 programs are selected. Right now, what we want to do is make sure that those self-studies are looking as good as possible.
I have a question.
Mhm.
Regarding the dates of the site visits. So it's still, for the programs that are selected, the visits are still Sunday, Monday, Tuesday?
I believe so, yes.
Right. So can we raise the issue of that just not being culturally sensitive for many New York programs? Especially Christians who attend church on Sundays.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that we can at least raise the issue. I know I was told that the reason they do that, being part of the peer review trainings, is that it's typically cheaper to travel on a Saturday. And that's the main reason for it. But I'm hoping that we can at least raise the issue. At least it's applicable for my program.
Thank you so much, Roxanne, for that. I will put that on the list for HFA questions, just like the child welfare protocol. We'll also ask about the Sunday start a visit component, because it is not really BPS 5 aware. Okay, and Sophia S, let's see, lots of good comments here. Let's see, Esther, I recommend a site visit simulation with home visitors and supervisors to take the edge off the anxiety. Yeah, absolutely. As much as they can practice. Those elevator statements are kind of always scary. So as much as folks can practice using kind of the HFA language, they'll become much more comfortable. Sophia, Navarre, we also saw our share of ones the last time around. We went first, so we had to learn from our own experience, but at the same time, others after us learned from our experience. games with your team in terms of getting to know the policies, was most importantly, the rationale for the policies will be super important and fun. Thank you so much, Sophia. And maybe we will ask you for some background on some of those games, if you can share some of that. Esther, I see your hand up.
Hi, yes.
Hi.
I just wanted to second Roxanne's and everybody else comment about the Sunday thing. I'm a peer reviewer and I have done site visits on Sundays. Of course, that's when we start, but and it is a good time for the peer reviewers to be quiet. There's nobody else other than our, the small group, our peer and the program manager, supervisor. However, I have gone to so many site visits where things have been in transition to be electronic file. A lot of people don't deal with a paper file, at least not with New York, right? And we can really not ask our IT people and our own agencies to come on a Sunday. So that it can also be a little bit of an issue for a lot, being that everything is more electronic now. And I will say that's an issue that we have to raise. I can see myself having a little bit of a problem having to coordinate permissions and access to computer here,
That's a good point. Thank you so much, Esther. All right, we're at 11:20. We can stay on if folks have more questions. That's also something I do regularly as Claudia. I schedule out a little bit longer than needed. I think, for some standards, we'll need the 2 hours to go over stuff. But for the most part, we'll probably end a little earlier. I'd rather do that than not give us enough time. Okay. But a couple of things. One, come prepared with snacks. I do not mind if you eat during the 2 hours here. If you need to walk away and take a break, feel free to walk away and take a break. And if you need to leave early, don't worry about it. Again, this is getting recorded. So if you're like, oh, if you zone out like I do from time to time and feel like, oh, I totally blanked the last 10 minutes, I have no clue what people were talking about, then that's what the recording is there for. So any other questions before we close? Any concerns? Right. Well, thank you all for coming.